Hello and welcome to Stories of Resilience, our podcast series to promote an ACE-aware nation in Scotland. Adverse childhood experiences touch us all in one way or another. This series explores the thoughts of those involved with the ACEs movement in Scotland, and we talk to individuals who have stories of resilience to share. I'm Gary Robinson. My guest today is Laura Falconer, who is the Assistant Director of Impact, Mental Health and Wellbeing for Barnardos UK. And Barnardos are very, very heavily involved with the forthcoming conference this September. Laura, thank you for joining me today. It's much appreciated.
No problem.
Great that you're involved with the conference, and I believe that you've got members of the team from Barnardos UK coming from all over the UK to Glasgow in September for the conference. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We've got staff coming from all 4 nations of the UK to hear the conference speakers, and we're quite excited about the prospect and the learning that we can take from the conference and embed across our organisation, across 4 nations and not just Scotland.
So how long has there been a link between ACEs and Barnardos? Have Barnardos as an organisation been aware of it for a number of years?
We have indeed. As an organisation, we've got quite a long history of working with vulnerable children and young people and their families. And many of the families that we have worked with historically over a long period of time will have experienced ACEs and developmental trauma. So although the ACEs language is new language, it's new language for work that we have been doing for quite some time.
And how does that fit into? How does the ACEs ethos and the practice? How does it fit into Barnardos UK? How do you use it, if you like?
Well, in a number of ways, it helps us understand the children and young people in the families that we are working with. We have a 10-year strategy that we're currently a couple of years into. And one aspect of that corporate strategy is to look at how we improve children and young people's mental health and well-being. And that's the aspect that I'm leading on for the organisation. And in developing that strategy, we started by scoping the evidence base, looking at the risk factors for good mental health and well-being. And that led us to an even greater understanding than we already had around the science, the neuroscience that was underpinning trauma and the impact that ACEs had on potentially on outcomes for children and young people. So what we've now got is a corporate strategy that for mental health and well-being that has ACEs, developmental trauma, resilience and trauma-informed practice at its heart. So what we're looking to do is to improve outcomes for children and young people's mental health and well-being by both reducing the risks to children and young people around their mental health and improving children and young people's mental health and well-being. So we're taking what we would describe as an ecological approach to that, using an ecological model, where we're looking at what the determinants are, how we support children and young people to become more resilient and equipped with coping strategies in the context of supporting the adults around about children and young people, and also looking at how systems can address some of the underlying issues around children and young people's mental health and well-being. And an understanding of ACEs and resilience and trauma is underpinning all of that work.
Okay, so can we just decipher a little bit of that? So when you talk about ecological, could you just explain a little bit more of what that means? I'm sure it's there within the answer, but I think just for people who aren't ACE aware, if you like, who may be listening to this, if we could just decipher a little bit of that language. So in layman's terms, what does that mean, Laura?
What does that mean? It means that we don't believe the child functions in isolation, that the child functions or exists in systems. So the child is within a family. The family is within a wider group of adults that are supporting that family, within a community, and within systems such as the school system, healthcare system, that are all there to support children and young people and children's well-being, mental health and well-being. So when we are looking at the ACE's agenda, we're not looking at it saying what impact is this just for the child. We're looking at it from a perspective of saying we need to also support families, we need to look at intergenerational ACEs, we need to support the parents so that they can better support children, and that we need to also look at communities and communities becoming ACE aware and trauma informed so that they can also support families and children within communities.
And how is that now manifesting itself? Are people now, if I can put it very crudely and very simply, are people now just getting it?
You mean within our organisation?
Well, within the people, or you mean
externally?
Let's go with externally. So the people that you deal with on a daily basis, whether it's families, individuals, or other external organisations, are people now just getting it?
I think it varies. I think the screening of the Resilience film has raised awareness. It's raised awareness both at an individual level within organisations and within communities where that has been shown. I think there's a lot of awareness raising that still could take place. And there's also a lot of other work that needs to go on around the awareness raising. So raising people's awareness of ACEs is not enough. You can't just raise families' understanding of adversity and the impact that can have on children. We need to make sure that we look at that in the context of also considering the resilience factors, because we know that ACEs are actually only one part of the story, that the adversity that a child experiences may lead to some challenges, but it's not the case that poor outcomes are inevitable. So we know from what the research tells us that in actual fact many children can experience adversity in life and developmental trauma and go on to have really good outcomes in life. So the experience of ACEs is not the only factor. We also have to look at that the protective factors that are around for a child, and what support there has been for a child in their experience of growing up. So I think for us it's really important that we consider ACEs as a starting point, but it's never the end point. The ACEs agenda gets us to a place of compassion and a place of understanding the importance of relationships and the importance of empathy and bringing that into our practice. But it is where we start and isn't where we end. So because ACEs tends to have a sort of deficit focus, it needs to always be balanced in our view with an exploration of who's around to support, what protective factors have there been for that child and that family. And for me, the real value of that ACEs inquiry or the ACEs agenda is that it should lead to the and so what, and what can we do to support children and families as a result. So in terms of are people getting it, I think what we've done so far is we've raised awareness in Scotland and in society to some extent. I think there's more work that we can do, and certainly more work that we can do in some areas around policy and having that understanding embedded in our policy. But it's only the starting point, because we need to get to the place of the understanding taking us to understanding how important trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practice is, and how we begin to change our practice as a result of that understanding. So we're at the beginning of the journey, I think, and at the beginning of the journey of people externally beginning to understand what's required to have an ACE-aware, trauma-informed nation. It's not enough just to have the ACE-aware nation. We need to have the trauma-informed practice in place as well.
We are talking to various members of the Scottish Government about ACEs, and we've spoken to a few already, and we have a few more large interviews coming up in the not too distant future before the conference. And that's the Scottish Government, but you deal with Barnardos UK wide. Are the UK government on board with this? It's a question I've not asked before, but are Westminster behind this? Do they get it? Are they supportive? Could they be a little bit more supportive?
I think there's an increased awareness across all 4 UK governments. I think people are beginning to understand at different levels. So some of the awareness is coming from organisations who are embracing the concept of awareness. Some of it is coming from government level. So there's a variation of where people are, but certainly across the board, the understanding and awareness of ACEs is increasing quite considerably and beginning to have, there's more conversations beginning to take place in a number of different forums across the 4 nations around how we take that learning from what the research is telling us and to use it to influence our policy and practice. So I can see it happening at different levels, if you like, across the 4 different bits of the UK, but it is all progressing and it's all moving forward.
And going to the conference, what will your team be doing on the day of the 26th?
Oh, I'm hoping they will be inspired by the speakers. I think they will be hopefully getting some answers to questions that they might have around how we make this work in practice, and they will have an opportunity to discuss where from their own service delivery perspective or their own position in the organisation, the burning questions that they have around ACEs and what we do next.
And what would you like to see the conference to achieve? I mean, your description of ACEs and where Barnardos UK fits into that is superb, Laura, and there's obviously an awful lot more work, and the conference might just be the start, really, of where we need to go. But what would you like the conference to springboard?
I think what it will do is it will galvanise energy. So I think there's a lot of energy happening at the moment across Scotland around ACEs. And what the conference will do will hopefully help to galvanise that energy and look at what we need to go forward. So what I'm hoping out of the conference is that we leave inspired. Obviously, there's a lot of energy there already out in the country, but that we begin to look at what it is we need to do next to actually bring this understanding into policy and practice. So that's probably my hope for the conference, is that we get a sense of the direction that we need to go, and we learn from areas that have already made that next step in the journey that we need to make. So if we're listening to Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris and we're hearing how this has become embedded in practice in America, that we're beginning to get some ideas about potentially what we can do in Scotland, learning from people that have been on this journey before us. So that's the key bit for me. I think what it will also do is raise some people's awareness if they are not as familiar with the ACEs agenda and they're coming along to hear what this is, then hopefully they will leave with a sense of Scotland has got a direction that we're going in that's the right direction, and that there's a level of trust in the people that are at the conference in terms of taking this forward.
Well, Laura, I look forward to seeing you on the day and catch up in person as opposed to this microphone and the telephone wire between us. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. Look forward to meeting you too.
That was Stories of Resilience, celebrating individuals and organisations who are helping to make Scotland an ACE-aware nation. Find out more about ACEs and the ACE Aware Conference this September in Glasgow at www.aceawarescotland.com.